A few weeks ago, Arrtx reached out to me and offered to send me their new line of alcohol markers, and I've actually never tried any products from Arrtx before, but I've heard a lot of good things about their markers, so I was really excited to try these. This release of their markers included sets in red, purple, green, and blue, and the colors inside are just basically different shades of the respective colors. And as you can see, their markers come in these absolutely gorgeous cases, which are actually really functional for several reasons. Each case comes with a really nice handle for travel, and the lid of each case is slanted, so you're able to have it angled slightly upwards when you set it up on a flat surface, which makes it really convenient for using on a desk. There's also cardboard dividers within the cases themselves to make sure each marker stays in its slot. That way they're not sliding around in the case whenever you take out a marker. These markers honestly have the best design in terms of packaging and realistic use that I've ever seen. Like, I personally use the Copic brand cases to store my Copics, but it's a little weird in the sense that the cases are intended to be stood upright, which makes sense for using the markers, but you're actually not supposed to store alcohol markers upright, and the Copic cases, they just don't like sit flat sideways. It's very strange, but with these cases, you can store them upright, you can store them on their side, they're very aesthetic, they're super functional for travel, everyday use, obviously storage, and they're easily the prettiest packaging that I've seen out there for markers. Onto the actual markers themselves though. The body of the markers are triangular and they also have a really smooth matte finish. I don't really know how to describe it, but the body of these markers, it just feels really smooth. I think it's because they have a matte finish, but it makes them really nice to hold in your hand, and you can really feel that when you're actually using the markers. They also have a number color code on the top of each cap and a nice cute little scallop design on the edges. These markers have a chisel nib on one side and a bullet nib on the other, and something I noticed right away when opening these markers is that the bullet nib looked really small. It's not necessarily a bad thing because I'm sure this comes in handy in many different situations, but it's just something to be aware of. It's the smallest bullet nib that I've seen on a marker. Another important thing to take into consideration about the physical appearance of these markers is that they don't have any kind of number or color indication on the body of the marker, only on the caps, which is something that I'm personally not a huge fan of. In my mind, it makes the most sense to have either a name or a number indicator on the caps and the body of the marker, but this really isn't a huge deal unless you're leaving multiple uncapped markers out at once. Each set of markers also comes with a little postcard of the case art as well as a swatch sheet. These are really nice and convenient to have, and I did end up filling out each swatch set, but it was a little frustrating because the markers come out of order of the swatch sheet, like actually in the case itself. They're very disorganized how they show up, and the swatch sheets themselves are on a fairly large sheet of paper, which just isn't my thing. I filled them all out. I actually ended up going ahead and redoing the swatch sheets on my own sheet of paper, and it was just extremely time consuming. I also went ahead and reorganized how the markers were set up in the case to be my personal preference, and that took a lot of time. So while I did go ahead and fill out the swatch sheets, I'm not going to use them. I'm probably going to toss them, honestly. They're really big, they take up a lot of space, and it's just a little bit of a pain in the butt to do, honestly. But in swatching these markers, you can see, even though, like, for example, the purple set is supposed to be focused on purples, it does have a lot of pinks mixed in with it as well, and it also has some really nice light skin tones. The red set does the same thing, it also has some really nice peachy colors, so that's a really cool addition to these sets because it really broadens what you can do with them. As far as the actual quality of the markers goes, I did really enjoy using them. I didn't notice any kind of significant quality difference between the ink in these markers compared to both the Arrtx markers and the Copics, which are pretty much the only other brands of alcohol markers that I'm familiar with, but when it comes to the things about these markers that I was not a fan of, honestly nothing was significant enough to steer me away from enjoying using and working with these markers. My biggest complaint about these sets would probably have to be that the colors really do not match the caps of the markers. Some are definitely worse than others, but the ones that are bad are really bad. I would always recommend having some kind of swatch sheet when you're working with a new art supply, but the color matching of these caps are so bad for certain markers that I don't think I'd ever be able to use them without having some kind of reference to go off of. While it does have like a similar shade, it's so off in tone, like especially with the red set I noticed when I was picking up markers, some of the caps were so much brighter and vibrant versus the color was pastel, so I never would have expected it to be the actual color it is. So the caps are fairly off on some of the markers. Another thing I wasn't a huge fan of was the lack of darker shades in some of the sets. The blue and green sets have a very balanced selection of lights versus midtones versus darks. In fact, in the green and blue set, it's pretty much like completely balanced, where you have a third of it being lights, a third of it being medium colors, and a third of it being darks. However, the red set of markers only had like 2 deeper dark shades, and the purple set of markers didn't really have any dark colors. It looks like for those sets, they chose to add more pastel colors to them to work as skin tones, but at the same time, I think they could have gotten rid of some of the colors that were very similar and instead substituted them for darker values, because within those sets, there are a couple of colors that are just so similar, and especially when you're going at a set with only 24 markers, I feel like they would have been better off changing it for something more different. I also wasn't a huge fan of how small the bullet nib of these markers were at the beginning, but it actually came in handy and it made it really easy to do any kind of line work with the markers. I didn't notice any kind of wear on either the bullet nib or the chisel nib when I was working with them, so it looks like they'll hold up for a lot of use. Those are pretty much all the negatives that I could pick out about these markers, so now we can get into the positives. First and foremost, these markers are so nice to work with. Like I mentioned before, the body of the markers have such a smooth matte finish, and it sits really well in your hand, and I found the size of the markers, it's just very comfortable to hold on to and work with, so that is definitely a positive. Something that you don't often see with lower cost alcohol markers are pastel shades, but each of these sets comes with a really nice variety of lighter shades, and while I wish they had substituted some of the midtones for darker shades as I mentioned earlier, each of these sets did a really good job in adding more than several pastels that are a really good addition to anyone's marker collection. One of the biggest draw-ins of these markers for me were just how pretty everything about their appearance is. From the packaging of the case to the actual body of the marker, you can really tell that the people who designed these put a lot of love and care into making everything look and feel just really cute. I have never seen any kind of marker brand go through what Arrtx does in making all their stuff just look really pretty. Like, it's just very nice. It's very nice to have cute art supplies, especially if you're displaying them, for example. They just look really nice. As far as the price of these markers go, Arrtx currently has each of these sets priced at $22.99 US on Amazon, making each marker cost roughly $1.04. This is a really good price for alcohol markers, as higher end brands like Copics can run you anywhere between $5 to $10 per individual marker. So these sets are really nice for including such a wide variety of shades of a specific color, but at the same time, in my mind, they'd be kind of weird for a beginner to purchase, as they'd probably be better off with a set of markers that has a wider selection of colors. Obviously, these markers definitely have their time and place though. I'm sure these will be extremely beneficial if you're looking to expand on a certain color selection in your marker collection. If you're, for example, obviously, if you need more blues, if you need more greens, etc. These are really nice because they do add such a variety of an individual color to your marker collection. As far as the drawings I made using these markers, the first drawing I did was of Madoka and Homura from Madoka Magica, and I was working with an Arrtx mixed media sketchbook. I really like using that sketchbook specifically to use with alcohol markers because I found the texture of the paper works really well with the markers. I did also want to try these guys out on a different kind of paper though, so I also did a couple of drawings in my render sketchbook. I did do a video using the render sketchbook when I first got it, and one of the things I immediately noticed about it was that the paper had such a weird, significant amount of color shift from when the ink is wet versus when it's dried, which I'm sure you can see as I'm working with this drawing. This just means you obviously need to have some kind of swatch card with you to make sure you're grabbing the right colors, because when you first lay stuff down, especially when it comes to skin tones, they look so much different versus when the ink is dry. It was also kind of hard for me to figure out how I wanted to show off the different sets of markers, just because they're so focused on an individual color, so deciding what to draw using both the blue and green sets actually took me a good amount of time. For the blue set, I decided to draw Deanna from Eden of the East, which is such an underrated anime, so if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. It's really good. But Deanna was the first thing that came to mind for me when I was figuring out what to do with the blue set, and I figured she would be a really good character to show off the colors in the set, so that's what I decided to go with. I also did go ahead and use some of the lighter colors from the red set for her skin, since I didn't want to do pretty much a monochromatic drawing for this. I wanted to have some kind of warmth in there as well, so the red set really came in handy. And then deciding on what to draw with the green set was really where I struggled the most, but in the end I decided to color a really quick bust of Link with these markers. I thought about going in and using the peachy colors from the red set to color his skin like I did in my last drawing, but that would honestly leave me with only using 2 or 3 of the green markers, so I decided to just stick with the green set for the entire drawing. This set is honestly the one that I like the least as far as these sets go, solely because personally I don't use a whole lot of greens, so this is just personal preference and nothing at all wrong with the set, but the colors themselves just weren't really appealing to me. But as far as the Arrtx markers go, I was really impressed with them. They're really good quality markers, they're very colorful and vibrant, and these sets have a really good color selection aside from a couple tweaks that I personally would prefer if they had. If you guys have tried these markers though, let me know in the comments below what you think about them as far as quality, color, etc. goes. I'd also love to know what you guys personally think about these color-specific sets. But we are really close to the end of the video, so thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.